All right, so we're going to get started on our lesson today. So before we get started on the quick write, can I get a timekeeper, please? Awesome, thank you, Valeria. So we have 30 minutes, and I just need you to make sure that's visible. Sometimes it falls asleep, so there's no lock on it or anything. So go ahead and press start. Perfect. All right, so we are going to start today's lesson with a quick write. You're going to do this quick write right on the back of the handout. So if you turn it over, on one side, you can just like do, it's almost like 2 column notes because you're doing 2 quick writes today. So on the first side, write quick write 1, the top of the page. All right, can somebody read our quick write prompt for me? Sam, go for it.
Life is easier when you are rich. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
Perfect. Life is easier when you're rich. So just like normal protocol with quick writes, you can write in paragraph form, you can do a comic strip with captions or a picture with captions, you can bullet point. The important thing about quick writes is that you're writing for the entire time. Okay? So take 3 minutes to answer this prompt. Life is easier when you're rich. You might start with, I disagree with this statement, or I agree because. You might make in the why or why not. You can make connections to your own personal story, make connections to things you've seen in, learning about in social studies, seen in the news, or even in other books you've read. So any connections in your why or why not would be awesome. You're doing great writing for the whole time. You have another 50 seconds. I'm going to count down from 10, and when I reach 0, the pencil sits down no matter where you are in your writing. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, pencils down, and go ahead and pair share before we do a whole class. So pair share your ideas. Yes, I agree. No, I don't. And here is why.
There's also conflicting things with money.
So you're saying no, I do not
Money
need
cannot buy you
work, so that
Sure, you may have a lot of money,
but it can buy you exposure.
that money makes.
Do you agree with that?
Money people
You could
will
buy everything
be
you
offended,
want.
but
What
not
do you think
true.
life would be like without being easier? Like, what would your day-to-day routine playing? Is there any time
I think
where
that
that
life
would
can
be
be definitely these are actually rich people.
Have anything to do?
People who can do pretty much.
I wonder. I don't know.
But when you're
These are
rich,
just
there's
questions I
only
have.
other problems that you'll face. Sure, you don't have to worry about
Right, and you can hear me clap once. You can hear me clap twice. You can hear me clap 3 times. All right, thumb up if you agree with the statement that life absolutely is easier when you're rich. Okay, and disagree? Ooh, we're like right down the middle. So let's hear from two people, one from agree, one from disagree. Raphael, why do you agree?
Okay. Of course, I agree with the statement that life is easier when you are rich. I think this is so because many aspects of life involve money. For example, there are many bills to pay, food to buy, just way more other things to worry about involving money. But when you're rich, money is abundant and you can use that abundant money to take care of the stuff that you have to pay. And then I was gonna say, like, as long as you're like reasonable with your money and you don't use it on like drugs and like bad stuff, and you use it like to help better yourself and like be
Okay.
productive, then like money makes your life way easier.
So does somebody on the disagree side want to respond or argue, debate his points? Matthew?
I just wanted to say that I do not agree with the statement because I don't know how it feels to be rich. So, and also, I also think that with every advantage comes a disadvantage. So, even if you were to like have the money to pay certain things, you still have like other advantages.
Wow, that's a really eloquent way to put it, Matthew, that with every advantage there's a disadvantage. It really does make me think like, okay, so Raphael, I would wonder how you would respond to that. You're talking about the advantage of having money and being able to pay for food and bills and not having that burden of debt or anything like that, right? But what would be some of those disadvantages then?
I wouldn't say about money, but how
So you don't, so I see, so you're trading this like, you know, being able to pay for stuff with not knowing who you can trust and what really why you have, like what your relationships are, what people's motivations to be your friends and something like that. That's really interesting. And it really puts into perspective the chapter that we're reading right now called My Childhood, which is, you know, Penelope, who is very rich. She's a princess. She's the daughter of a king, and she's married to a king. So she's Queen Penelope, and she talks a lot about her hardships, right? Okay, so before we actually go into the text, I just wanted to go over really quickly what our aim and objective is today. So can somebody read aloud the aim for today's lesson? Thank you. Oops. Thank you, Samju. Oops. All right, we're there. Go ahead.
What details in the chapter My Childhood helped me infer Penelope's attitude about her upbringing?
Awesome. So we're going to be looking specifically at details, and we're going to be looking at Penelope's attitude, right? Using those details. And then can somebody read the objective, please? Thank you, Jason.
Students will be able to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support their analysis of the text.
Can somebody put that objective in their own words? Students will be able to cite strong and thorough text evidence. What do you think, Genesis?
That we will be able to get pieces from the text that can strongly back up what we have to say.
Perfect. Beautifully put. So strongly back up what we have to say. So both our aim and objective are looking at details and evidence to back up what we have to say. All right, so we are going to go into our second read of My Childhood. Okay? And at the end of class, you should know that we are preparing for a very short shared inquiry discussion. Okay, so we're going to look at Penelope's attitude specifically about her childhood and whether or not she would agree that life is easier when you're rich. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take direct notes. So I and maybe a couple of volunteers will read aloud the chapter. As we're reading aloud, I want you to mark a plus where Penelope has positive feelings about her childhood and a minus sign where she has negative feelings. Okay? Goal would be to do at least 2 or 3 on each page. Okay? So try to get 2 or 3 positive or negative signs on each page so that we have enough details and evidence to support ideas during our shared inquiry. Okay? And if you want to write the plus and minus sign in the margins as well, you can do that. This won't be up during our shared inquiry. I'm going to sit and read. Actually, I'll sit. All right, so My Childhood. I'm starting on page 7. Where shall I begin? There are only 2 choices, at the beginning or not at the beginning. The real beginning would be the beginning of the world, after which one thing has led to another. But since there are differences of opinion about that, I'll begin with my own birth. My father was King Icarius of Sparta. My mother was a naiad, and I have some key vocabulary up here as well as we're reading. So a naiad is a water god or nymph in Greek mythology. So my mother was a naiad. Daughters of naiads were a dime a dozen in those days. The place was crawling with them. Nevertheless, it never hurts to be of semi-divine birth, or it never hurts immediately. See, I would put like a plus at that first sign, nevertheless, it never hurts to be of semi-divine birth, but then I would put a negative sign at that second sentence. It never hurts immediately. When I was quite young, my father ordered me to be thrown into the sea. I never knew exactly why during my lifetime, but now I suspect he'd been told by an oracle that I would weave his shroud. Possibly he thought that if he killed me first, his shroud would never be worn, and he would live forever. I can see how the reasoning might have gone. In that case, his wish to drown me came from an understandable desire to protect himself. But he must have misheard. Or else the oracle herself misheard. The gods often mumble. Because it was not his shroud that was at issue, but my father-in-law's shroud. If that was the prophecy, it was a true one. And indeed, the weaving of this particular shroud proved a great convenience to me later on in life. The teaching of crafts to girls has fallen out of fashion now, I understand. But luckily, it did not in my day. It's always an advantage to have something to do with your hands. That way, if someone makes an inappropriate remark, you can pretend you haven't heard it. Then you don't have to answer. But perhaps this shroud-weaving oracle idea of mine is baseless. Perhaps I've only invented it in order to make myself feel better. So much whispering goes on in the dark caverns, in the meadows, that sometimes it's hard to know whether the whispering is coming from others or from inside of your own head. I use head figuratively. We have dispensed with heads as such down here. She's speaking from the dead. She now lives in Hades. This is the point of view of it. Yeah. So that's what that means. We have dispensed with heads as such down here. Can I get another volunteer to read page 9? Thank you, Andres.
No matter. Into the sea I was thrown. Do I remember the waves closing over me? Do I remember the breath leaving my lungs and the sound of bells people say, "They're drowning here"? Not in the least. But I was told the story. There is always some servant or slave, or old nurse or busybody ready to regale a child with the awful things done to it by its parents when it is too young to remember. Hearing this discouraging antidote did not improve my relations with my father. It is to this episode, or rather, to my knowledge of it, that I attribute my reserve, as well as my mistrust of other people's intentions. It was stupid of
Icarius, that's her father, King Icarius.
to try to drown the daughter of a naiad. However, water is our element. It is our birthright. Although we are not such good swimmers as our mothers, we do have a way of floating, and we are well connected among the fish and seabirds. A flock of purple-striped ducks came to my rescue and towed me ashore. After an omen like that, what could my father do? He took me back and renamed me. Duck was my new nickname. No doubt he felt guilty about what the owners done. He became, if anything, rather too affectionate towards me.
Keep going. Or does somebody else want to step up? Genesis, thank you.
I found this affection difficult to reciprocate. You can imagine. There I would be, strolling hand in hand with my apparently fond little parent along cliff edge or riverbank or parapet, and the thought would occur to me that he might suddenly decide to shove me over or bash me to death with a rock. Preserving a calm facade under these circumstances was a challenge. After such excursions, I would retire to my room and dissolve in floods of tears. Excessive weeping, I might as well tell you now, is a handicap of the eye of death. I spent at least a quarter of my earthly life crying my eyes out. Fortunately, in my time, there were veils. They were a practical help for disguising their puffy eyes. My mother, like all naiads, was beautiful, but chilly at heart. She had waving hair and dimples, and a rippling laugh. She was elusive. When I was little, I often tried to throw my arms around her, but she had a habit of sliding away. I'd like to think that she may have been responsible for calling that flock of ducks, but probably she wasn't. She preferred swimming in the river to the care of small children, and I often slipped her mind. If my father hadn't thrown me into the sea, she might have dropped me in herself, in a fit of absent-mindedness or irritation. She had a short attention span and rapidly changed emotion. You can see by what I've told you that I was a child who learned early the virtues, if such they are, for self-sufficiency. I could see that I would have to look out for myself in the world. I could hardly count on family support.
Okay. So we're gonna, at the beginning of this lesson, we did a short quick write. Is life easier when you're rich? And we have our own personal ideas. And then we have this reading, our second reading of My Childhood, where we know Penelope comes from extreme wealth, right? She's the daughter of a king. And yet she has some very specific feelings about her childhood. Some positive and some negative. So we're going to actually explore these attitudes on a deeper level through a shared inquiry discussion. And I know we're used to having really long shared inquiry discussions, or at least ones that are like 20 to 30 minutes long. And today we're going to try to do it in 10. Okay? So using our directed notes, I see some of us, or most of us did our positive and negative signs. Using our directed notes, take maybe 1 minute really quickly and just gather some of your thoughts about the following question. So does Penelope think that life is easier when you're rich? What does she say in the chapter My Childhood to support your answer? Not yet, no. So just, you might jot down notes. I see Genesis using this space here. In the margins, go back to some of the places you marked in the directed notes with the positive and negative. And just jot down some of your ideas. Maybe that's a word, a phrase, or a sentence. A couple of things that you would say to answer or begin to answer this question. So once you have just a few initial thoughts, remember shared inquiry is really about getting, collaborating and having a dialogue. So just initial thoughts, and hopefully at the end of this, you'll have an even deeper understanding of your answer. So just to remind ourselves, I know it's been a few months since we've done a shared inquiry, but my job is just to ask follow-up questions if the need arises, and really to step back and allow you guys to talk and discuss the question. No hands, none of that raising hands. It's just remembering to, step up and step back. It's a very short one, and there's a lot of us, so making sure that if you have said one or two things, that you're allowing other people to step to sort of share their ideas. Respectful talk. Always support your ideas with text evidence. And before introducing your own ideas, respond and expand on someone else's. And of course, accountable talk. So I agree that, and this is why, or I disagree, and this is why. Okay? So, again, the question is, does Penelope think that life is easier when you're rich? What does she say in the chapter My Childhood to support your ideas? And when you give text evidence, if you could tell us the page number so that we could follow along. Okay, so who would like to begin? All right, so let's have Bo start, and then after that, we're jumping in and out to address his ideas. Okay, so Bo, what are your thoughts?
So, well, I honestly think your child, wait, your name is Penelope, right?
Mhm.
Okay, Penelope doesn't really find being rich is that easy, because honestly, she found, well, based on the article, like, on the last page where it says, on the last sentence, it says, I could hardly count on my family, meaning that she couldn't really, like, look up to anyone. And the fact that her father threw her in the sea proves that he didn't care at first, like, no one would actually show their love by throwing their only child into the sea. And the mother would constantly go and play with other children instead of her own. And she would constantly slip her mind, like on the last page where it says, 11. I mean, not 11.
Can you or somebody else step up? You said it's not easy to be rich, and you cited two specific, or three examples: the father throwing her into the sea, the mother playing with anybody but her own children, and she says, "I could hardly count on my family." Can you attribute those feelings to her wealth? Are those troubles specific to her status or her place in the kingdom? Okay. I'll jump in.
Sorry. Earlier, page 7 and 8, it said that her father threw her into the sea because he had an oracle, that she thinks he had an oracle, telling him that she would, whatever it's called, read his own shroud. And so he was scared about that, if he reached her shroud, if she won't his shroud, that he would die. And so if she wasn't there, then he would live forever. So that was because of his status, because he wanted to be king forever.
Anybody else want to respond to these two ideas that are out there? That that she didn't have very loving parents, and that would be because, especially with the father, because he was king and wanted to be king forever, and saw his daughter as a threat. Does anyone want to add on to those ideas or introduce a new one?
I would like to add on to that.
Can you speak up on this?
Oh, yes, I would. So I think that Genesis is right, and I think that I think he would rather live forever than being king, and because if he did not have a lot of money, then I don't think he would have much to live for anyways. So I think the money would have a lot of effect on this.
Any other places in the text that we see Penelope's attitude about her childhood? Maybe not just specific to her parents, just about her place in general? Yeah.
What does regale mean?
Can you show me the page number?
9. There's always some servant or slave or old nurse or busybody ready to regale.
Let's look it up. Context clues. Let's try to figure it out context clues wise. Old slave or nurse or busybody ready to regale a child with the awful things done to it by its parents. See? But what? Okay. But I was told this story. So somebody's telling her the story of all this awful things the parents are doing, right? So she's being told by, who's telling her the stories? We're talking about class here, right? That's what this question is about. Who's the one that's telling her how awful her parents are? Yeah, no hands.
Lower class people.
So how does that sort of help us understand this struggle that she has being a higher class? That she has maids, she has people in lower class telling her, your parents are awful.
Well, I think regale meant that to look out for. Because you said earlier that how there's always someone that kind of do something, tell the lower class would tell the child that their parents were in it, so I'm assuming that it was to look out for.
Will you look it up for us, Steve?
Tickle.
And while Steve looks that up, let's talk about this. It's very interesting, that choice of example, right? That, do you want to get that? Thanks. It's probably your lunch. So she has people telling her, not just anybody, but people telling her how awful her parents are. Why would somebody do that? What would be the motivation behind doing that? Okay, they don't like your parents. What else?
To warn her.
To warn her? Why would a slave or busybody, do you think the slaves and busybodies and old nurses care about her?
A little bit at least.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I feel like in a way they could care about her if they were close to her as a child, but also they might, as a child, you look up to your parents as very caring people most of the time,
Mhm.
and so you're blind to their faults and stuff like that. So the maids are there for maids and lower class people, and they don't have any affection towards the higher class people, so they might see houses or maybe they see horns. But I guess they might be trying to look out for her because she won't be able to see it back because her parents stitch her.
Steve, what's the definition?
It says to entertain sumptuously.
To entertain sumptuously. So they're telling her stories about how awful her parents are for entertainment. How does that help us understand the motivations of the lower class?
Maybe they find pleasure in doing that.
They find interesting. So let's hear from voices we haven't heard from yet. So now we're given a situation where we hear about how the lower class, find pleasure in telling Penelope how awful her parents are. Why would they feel pleasure telling her these stories? What would these stories? How would these stories make her feel? So why would they find pleasure in a lower class person finding pleasure in making another person, a princess, feel sad?
I think that it's not really a personal sort of thing, but I think lower class people feel that they should be the same class as others, and they're mad at high class people for just having more money than them.
Looking down.
Is there anywhere else do you want to say something?
Actually posted something that maybe it'll feel like they have power over her because even though she's a higher status, they have something over her that they can do to control her.
Her feelings.
Yeah.
They're controlling her feelings. Is there a place in the text that kind of shows how she sees herself as a princess? Look towards the end. Like, I'm wondering on page 10 or 11, she talks about how, she uses a word that describes her experience in her childhood.
I got it.
And I'm curious about what we think about that word.
Self-sufficiency.
Self-sufficiency. So how does that help us understand her childhood better?
And she can count on herself.
She can count on herself. Anything else?
She doesn't. No, it's kind of.
I think she feels that she doesn't have anybody to help her grow up anymore.
Yeah. So she, not only is she counting on herself, but she can only count on herself, right? We have 30 seconds. So anyone that hasn't shared their thoughts yet, does anyone want to jump in and just say one or two more ideas before we move on? So back to the original question, does Penelope think life is easier when you're rich? Why or why not? All right, so why don't we do this? So we have 1 more minute left in the lesson plan. So your ticket out the door today is to answer this quick right, and it's the exact same one that we discussed. So I saw, even though some of us weren't able to share in the short time that we had to discuss, I saw you vigorously taking notes in your text, which was awesome. So use those notes to answer this question in the second column on the back of your handout. So does Penelope think that life is easier when you're rich? What does she say in the chapter, My Childhood, to support your ideas? And here's the important piece, right? That we know that we've learned or mastered our standard. Use at least 2 details from the text to support your